Hey, it's Ann from Super Stitch. I'm back with some more tips and tricks. And today I'm going to talk about the ruffler, which is one of my favorite sewing machine accessories. So I'm really excited to share some tips and tricks for this particular accessory here. So we're going to talk about the parts of the ruffler, how you can make different adjustments and different things that you can do with it, and how to decide where you want to set your settings on the ruffler. So the first thing we'll talk about is the ruffler itself, and rufflers have pretty much not changed that much over the years, although this one is a snap-on and you might have one that attaches with the whole ankle. This one is going to snap on. So we're going to talk about the parts of the ruffler. So this is pretty much the what most rufflers look like. Now what's nice with this particular ruffler is it's adjustable here. You can see that I can actually make adjustments and I can move it left and right or forward and backward. It's very important that you only use a straight stitch center needle position with your ruffler. So you can make an adjustment so that your needle is going to be coming directly through this hole in the ruffler. So make sure that you're using a straight stitch only and that you can adjust the ruffler itself. So the first thing is to make sure that your needle is coming through that opening and not hitting any other part of the ruffler. So if you do have a ruffler that has the adjustments, you can do that. So then we'll talk about some of the other parts of the ruffler. Now this part is going to go around your needle bar. This particular ruffler is really nice because this is rubberized. There's a lot of friction going on when you're using a ruffler. So if your ruffler is completely metal here, you might get like a plastic collar that can go around the needle bar, so that'll cut down on that friction for you. But this is nice that it's rubberized here to cut down on that a little bit. So this is going to go around the needle bar, so the ruffler goes up and down with the needle. So this is how it's going to work. Now as it's doing that, this is what's going to tell it how often it's going to pleat. So you can just simply, this part will come off here. So if it is attached, if it's attached here, it's going to pleat every stitch. So every time the needle comes down, it's going to pleat. If it's here, it's going to pleat every 6 stitches. So your pleats will be a little bit further away. The first one, when it's on 1, it'll give you a very full gather. If it's on 6, it'll give you more like a pleated look every 6 stitches. If you want to space them further apart, you can go to the 12, and now it's going to pleat every 12 stitches. If you switch it over to the star, now it won't pleat at all. So sometimes you want to space your pleats away. For example, you could do 3 pleats and then move it over to the star and sew without pleating at all. As you're coming around a curve, sometimes it's nice to just switch it over to the star so that you're not pleating around a curve. So you can change that while you're sewing. So you can change it from pleating to not pleating. Then you're going to also have an adjustment. This is going to determine how deep that pleats. So this is your adjustment here. And it will kind of depend on the fabric that you're using, if you're using a softer or a very firm fabric, but some of them are calibrated. So for example, this one is going to have, it says 1, 4, 6, or 8 millimeters. So as I adjust this screw here, you can see that changing. So this is going to determine how deep it pleats. So what I'm talking about is right here, as you're stitching, this is going to be pushing your fabric through as the needle comes down to stitch. So this is what I'm talking about, how often and how deep that pleats. So we'll attach it to the machine, and then we'll talk about how you can make those adjustments. This one also has a little clip here that can hold my fabric down. So those are the parts of the ruffler, and we'll talk about how you can make those adjustments. So to set up I have attached my straight stitch needle plate. Again, it's very important that you only use a straight stitch center needle position. So by attaching my straight stitch plate, machine won't let me do anything but the straight stitch. So if you have a straight stitch needle plate, I do recommend you use that. You also want to use like a 90-14 needle, and I recommend that you use your screwdriver and tighten that needle down good. You don't want to over tighten it or strip it, but you want to make sure that that's on there good and tight. And you also want to make sure that you've tightened your ankle down very tight, because there's a lot of friction going on here. And I also will kind of double check it, because as you're zipping along here, sometimes that needle will loosen up. So I'll just double check my needle as I'm going. So that's a little tip to, as you're sewing along, just every once in a while stop and check that so the needle doesn't fall out as you're going. It's also a little bit easier to just take this right off, don't have it attached at all, and then I can easily place that around my needle bar, and then I'm going to snap it on. So once it's on, now I can adjust this. So we'll talk about the differences between the 1/6 and the 12 again. And then my adjustment here is for the fullness. I'm going to back off a little bit of that for right now. So the first thing you need to do, again, is to make sure that that needle is coming straight through that hole. So I'm going to slowly lower the needle down into the opening and make sure that that lines up. If it doesn't, then you can adjust that screw and actually move the entire mechanism so that that needle is directly through that opening. You want to make sure it's not hitting at all. So I just manually, very easily drop that down through there. Now, let's talk about how you're going to determine where to set these. So the first thing you want to do is determine how many strips of fabric you're going to need to create the ruffle. So this particular pillow I'll use as an example. I have a panel that measures 12 by 16. So 12 plus 16 times 2 to go all the way around is 56 inches. Now, I didn't want it terribly full, so I multiplied by 1.5 because I have a double ruffle here. So 1.5 was going to be full enough for what I wanted. So 1.5 times 56 ended up being 84 inches. I divide that by the width of fabric, which is 42. So that tells me I need 2 widths of fabric. Now, if I ended up saying I needed 2.5, I would just probably round that up to 3. So I just cut however many widths of fabric I need. I usually try to err on the side of cutting more so that you'll have extra. So that's how you're going to determine how much fabric you need. So we'll show you again how you're going to now determine the settings on your ruffler itself. Now, if you have the M7, you can actually go to your sewing applications page and go to your feet. Now notice, since I have my straight stitch needle plate on, the only thing that's available to me is the ruffler. So when I select that, here are my options here. So if I'm not sure and I've never used a ruffler, again, I can use my AccuSpark tool and I can just scan that. And then this is going to, again, give me all the information that I just went over and tell you how to use your ruffler. So you have this available to you as well. If you notice, when you select, right now I've selected the 1, so it won't let me make any changes to the width or the length. Everything is preset for me. So again, you just want to use a single straight stitch center needle position on any machine. So now let's talk about how I'm going to determine my settings. So what I do, just a little tip here to determine how I want to adjust my settings, is I will mark off my strip in 10-inch increments. So let's say that I want double fullness. I'm going to adjust my settings till the 10 inches comes down to 5 inches. If I wanted triple fullness, I'd adjust my settings till the 10 inches goes down to 3 and so on. So this just makes it easy for me to play. You're going to want to kind of make some adjustments and play with it and get your settings just the way you want it first of all. So I've marked off my 10-inch increments. I'm going to start with number 1. So this is going to pleat every stitch. So you're going to take your fabric. I've got this little clip here. Your fabric needs to go in between here. This is the piece that's going to pleat it. I can place my fabric into that little clip, although I don't use that if I'm doing a double ruffle just because it's too thick. What's important is that you're going to pull the fabric all the way to the back. You don't want to just have it right here. It's got to be all the way into the foot to begin. And then I'll manually just turn my hand wheel to take a stitch just to make sure that I'm good here. So you can see I'm just manually turning this so you can see how that's working. So now every stitch is pleating. So I've backed off a little bit. I'm on the 1. So this is just going to give me like just a nice full gather. I'm sewing slowly and you can see that it's gathering every stitch. So it's stitching every stitch there. So what I'll do is I'll sew up to that point. Here's what my ruffle looks like, gathering every stitch with it on the 1. So what started at 10 inches is now down to 3 inches. So that's going to give me triple fullness. If that's what I want, that's great. I'm all set to go. And you can see what a beautiful little ruffle that makes. But if I only want a double fullness, I know that I've got to do 2 things. I either need to back off the amount of fullness, or maybe I switch to every 6 stitches. So we'll do another one with every 6 stitches so you can see what that looks like. So now I'm going to switch this from the 1 to the 6. So it's only going to pleat every 6 stitches. And maybe I'll make this a little bit deeper too, just so you can see the difference here. I'll dial that in, and now it's actually going to do every 6 stitches, but a deeper pleat. And I think I'll actually make that even a little bit deeper. I'm going to push that in. You can see how that adjusted the pleat so it's even deeper. And I'll go ahead, just so while we're here, I'll switch it to the 12 so you can see what that looks like. And again, if I decided I needed to sew without pleating, I don't have to take the whole ruffler off. I can just switch this over to here and you'll see it's just going to stitch. So if I just needed to sew without pleating, I don't have to take my ruffler off. I can just switch it over here and I'm just sewing. So let's take a look at what that measured. So now by pleating every 6 stitches, you can see from here to here, my 10-inch markings, it's now down to 6 inches. So that's actually going to be fine for the pillow that I'm making. But you can see that it's a completely different look from my really full gather. So that's a great thing about the ruffler, is that it's very versatile, that you can get completely different looks anywhere from a full gather to a nice even pleat. So that's your tip on how to figure out how to make your adjustments and how to figure out your fullness. Just mark off those 10-inch increments. You just got to do a little bit of math, but the 10-inch makes it pretty easy to go from 10 to 3 or 10 to 5. So that's just your little tip there for figuring out how to do your settings. Now a little trick how to do a banded ruffle. This is a really cute effect for adding ruffles because it just adds that little extra band along the edge here. So if you do want a double ruffle, so I've got one here and then here. So I've got 2 different fabrics that are going to complement each other, and it gives that little bit of contrast that adds a little band along the edge of the ruffle. So we're going to show you how to do that. So once you've figured out how many widths of fabric you need, you're going to cut your main ruffle 2.5 inches. the one that you want to be the band, that will be actually the back side of the ruffle, is going to be 3.5 inches. So 2.5 and 3.5, and you're going to seam those right sides together. I usually would have done this with my 1/4 inch foot, but since I've got the ruffler on here, I'll just leave it at the star, and we'll just put this on the bottom so it's not going to, I'll just run that through and just stitch those together real quick. So I've gone ahead and pressed this. I pressed the seam allowance towards the main ruffle and then pressed raw edges even. You can see how that creates that nice band along the edge. And now, because it's a double ruffle, I'm going to ruffle this together. I'm going to base stitch these raw edges together so that they will pleat together. So after I do that, then I'm going to base that. So I usually will prepare this with probably using my 1/4 inch seam foot before I use the ruffler. Now there's two options with your ruffler. You can actually ruffle and seam at the same time, so I could ruffle this and attach it to my pillow at the same time, or sometimes on something like that it's easier to ruffle it first and then seam it. So you have two options. You can ruffle and then attach it, or you can ruffle and attach it all at the same time. So I'm going to show some tricks how to join them at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use every 6 stitches. Usually when you're doing the double ruffle, that's a little bit better choice than trying to make a really full ruffle with a double layer of fabric. And again, so like as I'm going along here, I might just kind of stop and just double check to make sure my needle's good and tight, make sure my ankle's good and tight. So just kind of stop every once in a while and just check that, because again, you can see that there's a lot of action going on here. Now when you get to the end, you want to make sure that you just pull the ruffle all the way out the back. Don't try to yank it to the side, pull it to the back. So there's my beautiful ruffle ready to attach to my pillow. So there's 2 ways to join. So you can see in this pillow, we just started sewing and then ruffled all the way around, and then when it got to the end, just tucked one end into the other, and you could do that with a straight seam, or you could have angled it, done a bias if you want there. So that's one way to just start at one point and just kind of tuck the end into the beginning and then top stitch that down. But I'm going to show you another way. So let's say, and I'll switch to my regular foot to show you this. So one little trick here is I'm going to attach this right sides together, and I'm just going to kind of show, we'll say this is the beginning and the end here. So at the beginning, I'm just going to curve my ruffle right off the end and start sewing here. So we'll start sewing that. So I'm just going to sew where that has just gone. I just curve it right off the end. And so I'll go all the way around, attaching the ruffle as I go. As I come all the way around the end, what I'll do is I will curve the end off again, overlapping the beginning part. So this is the effect that I get, where I just have that little crisscross. The advantage to this is you really don't have to worry about matching the ends perfectly. And so I usually just make sure I've got plenty of extra ruffle that I can just go in, go off, and just curve it. And it's just kind of a cute little finish at the end. So that's just a little tip for how to begin and end when you're attaching your ruffle. So that was a double ruffle. Now if you just want to attach a single ruffle, I've taken a strip and I went ahead and just finished one edge here. So you could do, I did a rolled hem on a serger, you could do the rolled hem that we've shown in a previous video. So I've just got a single ruffle. So you can also ruffle and attach at the same time. The piece that I'm going to attach it to is just going to simply go on the bed of the machine underneath the ruffler. So that's just going to go underneath and the ruffle. So then the ruffle part is going to again go in as before. And again, make sure it's all the way in here. And I'll just line up my raw edges. So as I'm sewing, the top fabric or my ruffle is being ruffled, and at the same time it's being seamed to my bottom fabric that is on the bed of the machine underneath the ruffler itself. Just like that, I have seamed, I've ruffled and attached it at the same time. So it's just a great way to add a nice ruffle at the bottom of a curtain, a dress, anything. It's just a real quick, easy way to do that. Now, if I wanted to just put rows of ruffles, I can do that as well. The ruffler is great for making crinolines. You can simply just use this method to put in just rows and rows of tulle on a lining. So you can make a crinoline really, really easily. So in this strip, I've finished both edges, and I can just again place this in here. And this time I'll switch it back over to the one, so I just get a really nice full gather. That might be a little too full, so I'm going to back off of this a little bit. Or I could have stitched down the middle of the ruffle, however it is I want to attach that. So you can see now I've attached a ruffle right across the middle there. So you can just have so much fun with a ruffler. There's so many options available to you, so try some of those tips and tricks. But I will talk about the difference between a ruffler and a gathering foot. Sometimes those get confused. This is a gathering foot. So it will create gathers and some nice full gathers, but it doesn't have the adjustments that a ruffler does. Where this is really nice, what I like to use this is for some of my more delicate fabrics. So I'll show a technique called puffing on some batiste. Now notice the gathering foot again has the 2 bars. So again, anytime your foot has 2 bars, the back bar goes on the back of the ankle, then snap down. So what I can do with this is I'm just going to, and again, it doesn't have the opening to draw it under, so I'll just do a needle down, needle up, draw my fabric away, and now the thread is underneath the foot. You want to make sure the foot is entirely on the fabric. Don't start with the fabric here. It needs to be completely in the fabric. And I've just run the edge of the foot along the edge of the fabric. I am going to tighten my tension. I'm going to adjust. I'm going to have a long stitch length and a tighter tension. So now as I sew, it also gives me that nice full gather. So to make a puffing strip, I'm going to sew down one side of the strip, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side of the strip. So the gathering foot works with your nice soft fabrics. Your firmer fabrics work much better with a ruffler. You can see what a nice soft gather the gathering foot makes, where the ruffler makes a very, very defined pleated gather. So I hope you enjoyed watching these tips and tricks, and I hope you really have some fun with your ruffler. Just if you want to put any comments below, any questions, we're happy to offer other suggestions for you. So have some fun with your ruffler. Make sure you subscribe to get more tips and tricks.